So this is audience development, and I'm going to talk about how SEO and social work together. It's like how we really interact with editorial, how we inform them with data, and how we distribute all the content that we publish. Obviously, at such large volumes, you might think, well, you've got loads of resources, this might not be relevant to me, but actually I think you can take anything away from publishing at scale and apply it, even if you're working just on your own as a blogger. So I'm James Carson, I'm head of SEO and social media at the Telegraph. I've previously worked at Bauer Media and Factory Media, so brands like FHM, Empire, Grazia, White Lines for snowboarders out there. And I've written quite a lot on content strategy, and you can see that at that URL there on eConsultancy, and follow me on Twitter at Mr. James Carson. So the Telegraph, I'm sure most of you are aware of this brand, but its history is really quite impressive. It's been around for 161 years. It has over 50,000 editions. Our 50,000th edition was last year. I think we're on about 50,400 now. Best-selling broadsheet newspaper in the UK. And also really, really big website. So 4.2 million daily browsers to telegraph.co.uk in April. That equates to about 80 to 100 million unique users a month. And also we're famous for big investigative journalism stories like MP's expenses that really shook the political establishment in 2009. And this year, an investigation into corruption and greed in football, Football's for Sale, which ended with Sam Allardyce resigning from his job as England manager. So pretty big, impactful news there. And I think this tweet really sums up what this is in some ways what our brand is about. Like, we have such rich history that we're able to tweet actual reports of Abraham Lincoln's assassination when that happened in 1865 and say, on this day, this is how we reported it. And obviously that's got really high engagement there. So what is audience development? And this paper around editorial analytics is really handy for thinking around how we use data in real time to inform a newsroom. But I'll sum it up like this: the reviewing of multiple data sources to plan for digital content, and when that content has been published and distributed, assessing its performance data to continuously improve audience responses. So there's a kind of four-step process of planning, publishing, distributing, and assessment. So in content strategy, there's a lot of focus on the publishing bit, and probably not enough on the other side, and this process really brings it all together. So where's SEO and social media in this mix? They're not needed to be named parts, because they're essentially glue that sticks it all together. The data informs every bit of the path, and the distribution really is key, and I'm going to really focus on the distribution part in the talk. So just go into planning quite briefly, and just think around how the audience team works around the three fundamental types of content that we put out. So you have things like trending and breaking news, where we have to have someone focused on exactly what's going on in real time, and then be able to spot that and inform desks really, really quickly. And you have tools like Data Miner or Spike that can inform you, or even things like Google Trends or Twitter Trends can help you there. But the desk creates that, and then it comes back to the social team or the SEO team to see where it's distributed and how it's performing on those channels. And then there's event planning. So what I mean by that is things like events that you know that are going to happen. So in sports and entertainment, that's very easy to spot. Obviously in politics, you have things like elections. So you know that big event is coming. What do you need to do in the build-up? What do you need to do on the day that it happens? And what do you need to do in the aftermath? And then there's evergreen stuff. That is, reviewing what is currently getting evergreen search traffic, and then looking at keyword analysis to look at further opportunities there. So these work in very different ways as well around how they're distributed. Trending and breaking might work really, really well on Twitter and Google News, but it probably won't get as much traffic from Google Web, which are quite different in how they work. So how people search really informs how we plan for stuff. If you look at trending or breaking events, these are outlier events that you can't really predict. And it sounds a little bit kind of weird juxtaposition to talk about audience and a famous person dies. But you have this, it's kind of uninspected, and you have this rush of search. And then afterwards, you'll have this aftermath as people kind of look up information on a person. And trending and breaking events are this huge build-up, huge spike, and then an aftermath. So known events, you have a kind of short build-up before it happens, and then it does happen at it peaks, but then the aftermath's actually quite small. So things like the Oscars, the result happens, and then people lose interest actually really, really quickly compared to a trending or breaking event. And then evergreen, where you have a near constant flat trend, occasionally trending up around events. So that headline, 10 simple Prosecco cocktails everyone should master, it did really well on social as well. It's really well shared on Facebook, but obviously ranks for Prosecco cocktails, and people generally search for that on a Saturday when they're planning a dinner party. Well, you might do that every day, but... Right, so there's different ways that we can think about how we distribute stuff on social as well, and just want to like have a close inspection of the way we would present stuff on Twitter. So with breaking news, because you can't predict exactly what is going to happen, you kind of have to have a generic plan around it and a generic type of content to distribute. So you have to make something like a breaking news card, which we'll use for most breaking events. But then when it's an event, you can kind of plan like, you know, what's going to happen. Let's have a select template. We knew that the cabinet reshuffle would happen on Sunday. On Friday, we sort of like, oh, it might happen today, but then we found out it would be on Sunday. So it's like we quickly made this template, and we can distribute that really, really quickly. So you can plan for this sort of stuff on Twitter, and in events, this really works. Twitter really works quite well in responding to stuff. Facebook is way more serendipitous. As in, like, this sort of stuff doesn't travel quite as well on Facebook as it does comparatively on Twitter. But saying that, Facebook does drive far, far more traffic than any other social platform. So when you're in the planning process as well, just think around what does success look like. Base this on like market, internal, and competitor data. So that's things like, you know, you might look at BuzzSumo for social sharing, or you might look at the keyword planner for keyword analysis, and also your internal data. And then look at the list of content you need to meet success metrics. Do you have that? And what else do you need to meet your target benchmark? And once you've kind of created that plan, it doesn't end with an email report. Like, it's really, really important to meet and discuss it, because editorial will probably know more about the event than us in the analysis teams. But we'll be able to inform them around the analysis. And if we just send them a list and say, do this, 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 it's like it's hard to prioritize versus what they want. So you have to have a compromise and stuff. I mean, you can have a meeting planking. I think that's quite an ingenious idea. 90 seconds, everyone would probably collapse. But it's not something we do. So onto the publishing stage. And really, this is a focus around what we focus on to get stuff distributed. So the story, the fundamental who, what, where, when, and how will be answered by a journalist, really, by their knowledge and insight into a particular story. But we need to decide what is the best way of telling it. So it could be a text-based article, or a listicle, or a video, or it could be a combination of those things. If you take Labour election gaffes in the 2017 election, that story, there are lots of different ways that you could tell it. And we decided to run it as a gallery and a video because those two things like work together quite well. And obviously a video would do a bit better on social than a gallery would. So I just want to go into depth and headlines because they're probably one of the most important distribution elements of content. You know, this is a quote from David Ogilvy in the 1960s, which is completely timeless. On average, 5 times as many people read the headline as read the body copy. When you've written your headline, you have spent 80 cents out of your dollar. So what he's essentially saying is the headline is 80% of your content. And he's talking about a day and age where you had long-form copy in an advertisement. And a headline would drive engagements to read that. And these 2 books are really, really worthwhile reading. I think Tested Advertising Methods is one of the best marketing books I've ever read. There's probably about 100 pages on like how to write headlines, and it's really, really useful if you're doing anything on social media or email subject lines and things like that. And then this quote from Jacob Nielsen's very useful as well. The headline text has to stand on its own and make sense when the rest of the content is not available. So when you think around, you know, a distribution point like Facebook, you have quite a limited amount of information that you convey, and that sort of headline there intrigues in isolation enough to get sort of click through. So that's the sort of vice validation headline. People will also share that because it's like, yeah, chocolate is good for me, great, I'll eat more. But also your top image selection is really crucial as well, and that you know, is quite blunt and just says, you know, chocolate bar. It's very, very simple, and you can see it's got quite good engagement there. So I was doing a study into fashion e-commerce and content marketing and reviewed a lot of headlines around. And these headlines are what I found amongst loads and loads of blogs. They don't really mean anything in isolation, which is a big problem because they don't really drive click-through. And also, it's worth thinking around, when you distribute something, will it get shared, or will it get clicked, or will it be a combination of these things? So let's say you publish a photo of a galaxy and say, this is a beautiful photo of the galaxy from NASA. You're kind of telling the story just in that post. So you'll probably get a lot of retweets, but you've told the story and it's not going to get that many clicks. Stuff in this quadrant that doesn't get shared and won't get clicked, not really interesting. But then there's stuff that will get clicked but doesn't get shared. That's sort of stuff like often things to do with sex or like true crime will be in that quadrant because people don't want to share that sort of information, but it's like really, really high curiosity, so they will click into it. Where we really want to be is that it will get clicked and it will get shared, which I think like this chocolate post does really quite well in doing that. Right, and then just a note on embeddables as well, because obviously we use infographics and talk about them a lot, but on their own, I don't think they necessarily engender more social engagement if they're embedded in a story. If you use them to tell a story in a different way, often they can be a big driver of sharing, but they can definitely help dwell time as well, which will help on things like Google News. So distribution. So there's two main things here. Our biggest distribution points are Google News and Facebook, which is like, when I first started there, I was thinking, oh, right, it's all about Google Web, but actually Google News is a huge, huge driver, and it's actually a different algorithm. And then Facebook likes and sharing, the rate of click-through is exponential the more you have. So if you have less than 100,000 likes on your page, it's actually very difficult to drive meaningful organic traffic, in my opinion, and you probably have to pay. We have pages that are like bordering on 300,000 now, and we're starting to see meaningful click-through there. Obviously, our main brand account is huge and drives an enormous amount of traffic compared to those smaller pages. So there's this huge exponential effect. The bigger your Facebook likes are, the more sharing you will get. And so we've built up a network, and we're focused on this for the long term around, we have the Telegraph, which is our main branded account. It's over 4 million likes there. But we've gone into things like news and science and politics, things that we can go deep into verticals and distribute lots of content on a daily basis. There's not much point in going like really, really specific. Say that we had, in football, you had like a specific club page, like Everton or Leeds United a page. You know, how many stories do we publish around that? You know, if it's not over 10 a day, we didn't feel real justification for that page existing. So we've kept it very tight around verticals where we have a lot of volume. And then Twitter, we actually have like more than 60 accounts. It's really easy to automate Twitter via RSS if you're publishing at volume, because fundamentally, you know, it's a headline and a link is what we're distributing. And then you can do other things like distribute evergreen via a database as well. So over 60 accounts there, largely automated. It's nigh on impossible to be able to automate, to not automate that many accounts. You know, if you're doing that manually, it would just take up way too much time. And then Instagram, we have a network as well of 6 accounts. So just Google News SEO is a completely different algorithm. Things like page authority, you know, page rank, domain authority don't actually apply. The way that people kind of exist there is that Google has actually taken like a human interpretation of a news source. So you might see talks around how to get into Google News. How to rank actually depends on Google's opinion of you as a brand. And obviously, you might get in there and they'll have no opinion of you at all. So it's very difficult to rank. But if you're going into an event, these factors like really matter. So the number of articles you produce in the 30 days before an event, that's building up authority around a subject matter. So if you're going into the election, for instance, you want to be publishing lots and lots of stuff about the election, of course. And that relates to the breadth of coverage. So the broader your coverage about different topics around that subject matter, then you will do better when that actual event comes around. And then when you're trying to rank, it says in the Google pattern that the average length of an article produced and the number of original named entities are both important factors. So if you think the longer your article is, the more likely it is to have more facts, which are named entities. So both of those are beneficial. And there's also a breaking news score in it. So the quicker you are to publish, the more likely you are to sustain a ranking in the Google News algorithm. So just onto what works where and the different types of content we create. So not everything you produce will just work on Facebook or work on Twitter. And so we're kind of bunching it up into different places on a spectrum. There are things like trending stories which are completely created for social, and I'll go into specific examples around these. Opinion and features, which might be linked to an event, but really give a strong opinion on social media that people can react to. They'll probably do better on social than they will on search. So news reports can do well on both and get comparative traffic from either. Evergreen is more search, but like that Prosecco recipes thing that I showed earlier, sometimes it can do well on social too. And then live blogs is more search, and then sort of fundamental who, what, where, when, how explainers are very, very searchy, and you don't really get any traction on social media at all. So just some examples of that relating to the UK election. So more social, like an example of a trending story will be Larry the cat holds fort outside number 10 as the country is plunged into chaos on Friday. So a really strong social reaction to that. Not a lot of people are searching for Larry the cat at that time. It's a kind of very serendipitous story that people will share around on Facebook. So that's more and more of a social story. But then also an opinion piece, you could rank for Jeremy Corbyn with that, but it's quite it's a statement that takes a particular side and gets a strong reaction. Then you have more of a news report, which we could do well on search or social, the kind of thing that we would publish, front page of the paper or front of the website. And then what is a hung parliament? Obviously that relates to the event, but you could use that at any time. Like people could search for that when they're doing research about hung parliaments or anything like that. So we wrote that for the event, but it has a shelf life that's pretty much permanent. And then you have a live blog. You get lots and lots and lots of traffic from news boxes with live blogs. And then we have this kind of fundamental explainer. So not everyone has the time to read all of the manifestos going into the election. So we've created an explainer there. If you distribute that on Facebook, you're not going to get a huge amount of engagement, but lots of people will be searching for the Conservative manifesto key points. So it gets quite a lot of traffic there. But there are some exceptions to this rule, like things can move around the spectrum. So these are some examples that do well on social but can move up to search and vice versa. So the Great Barrier Reef story, for instance, like loads of people when that broke were searching for Great Barrier Reef, but also did brilliantly on search on social, and fundamentally that is a news report. And then we'll have things like what is fundamentally an explainer around St. David's Day. But if you distribute that in quite a St. David's the patron saint of Wales, I think, a pro Welsh way, and oh yeah, he is. Then it gets a really good response on Twitter. So things can move along the spectrum, but generally speaking, we do see it like in this kind of way. Stuff will perform in this manner if it applies to one of these criteria. So not everything will work on social, as I say. We never know 100%. Some things are very unlikely to work, like the Conservative manifesto thing. If we do distribute it, then traffic will likely be very, very small. It won't get traction. The story will just die, essentially, and not really be picked up. And why don't we just post everything anyway? We publish over 200 stories a day. It's mainly to do with time. We do actually publish everything automatically on Twitter, but we publish as much as we can that is suitable on Facebook. And there's also limited space in the newsfeed on Facebook. If you're publishing upwards of 80 stories a day on a Facebook page, you have this sort of law of diminishing returns. So we've noticed that 80 seems like a good level. Some publishers publish like around 60. If you go up to over 100, I think there is quite a clear law of diminishing returns. And this 80-20 rule is so important in social. Like the fact that 20% of your articles will give you 80% of your traffic. It might even be upwards of that, like 10% drive 90. But it's an important rule to consider because lots and lots of stuff you'll publish will not work, to be honest, and it means that you do have to publish at volume if you want to get really, really big traction on social media. Also, social has a big short head and drives lots of traffic in a rush, but does not have the long tail that search has. Obviously, because like, stuff on search like ranks permanently. So the conservative manifesto thing is like a good example of being part of the long tail, which might get traffic pretty much forever, as people might like look at that as a reference point. So this is just the election, and just see the marked difference between what performed well on search and what performed well on social. And I've kind of boxed them into different groups. The one at the top, which is the live blog for the day of the election, is like the traffic there is enormous. The next box is like pretty big, and then that one is big. But actually, this box here, in terms of traffic, is comparable to the max that was driven from social. And you'll see that most of this stuff is like the live event thing, event content that is, people are searching for it and going into the news box, essentially. So what do we have there? 4 out of the top 10 stories are actually live blogs. Because the amount of content coming through, we have to create new live blogs because of things like download time. The amount of content within it slows down the page, and you have to change and redirect the live blog. And then there are certain planned stories that also got a very high traffic. So we had the poll tracker that always does very well in the build-up, that people want to find out about the polls. So that's a very high traffic article that we plan. But also, what is a hung parliament? We weren't expecting that to happen, but we had written that explainer because it has happened recently before, of course, in 2010. And that ended up being a huge amount of search in that. And also, once we realized that the DUP are likely to go into an agreement with the Conservative Party, you have to write around the DUP and explain who they are and how that relationship might work. And there's also some reactive stories in there, like Scotland election results, Alan Salmond defeated and SNP suffer huge losses, and will Theresa May resign? So they're reactive stories, but obviously they're not really as they're not as big as the live blogs there. On social, you can see a lot more serendipity is around. You might even think, like, where's the election? Because like the top story around the election was actually police dog was fired from his job for an adorable reason. So this is a story about a police dog who was fired for being too friendly. Like when he was like going to like find criminals and stuff, he'd be like really cozy with them and stuff. So the police had to sack him. But there are some examples there, like exactly 104 years ago today, Emily Davison died for the women's right to vote. So she was the suffragette who jumped in front of the King's horse at Epsom, and we knew that would happen at the day of the election, and we knew that anniversary was going to happen, so we wrote that story. So that was planned. As you can see, that Larry the Cat story, which was reactive, was big on social. But there's a lot of serendipity because Facebook doesn't drive lots and lots of traffic to huge news events in the way that it drives traffic to serendipitous stuff. Often, the Saudi Arabia story, for instance, there is quite a shocking story that people will share around. So once you've distributed your content and gone through the process of essentially this is assessment, come on. Right, and get all of the data you can to discuss. So that's things like on-site performance data, but also native social data. So you can look at social performance at an article level, but it's also important to look on what performed on Twitter, how many retweets did this post get on Twitter specifically, and how much click-through it got. Because click-through and actual traffic from social is sometimes quite different. So you need to see how much did you actually drive from that initial Twitter post. And then also like rankings reports can be very, very handy, of course, in your assessment. So have another huddle and then discuss performance, much like in the planning phase, and then you return to the beginning for, next time there's an election, we have all this data, we're ready to go again. All right, thanks.